Robert Raymond Cook was one of the worst mass killers in Alberta history. On June 28, 1959, he murdered his father, stepmother, and 5 half-siblings in their Stettler home. On November 15, 1960, he was hanged in the Fort Saskatchewan prison at 1 minute after midnight. He was the last man to be executed in Alberta. But were it not for another odious murderer, a 22-year-old Calgary man named Ronald McCorquodale, Cook might have been spared the gallows and could very well still be alive today. The intertwining of these two grisly cases starts 4 months after the Stettler murders in, of all places, the washroom of a church in downtown Calgary. Mrs. Tina McDonald was tidying up inside the First Church of the Nazarene on 14th Avenue Southwest after a meeting of her women's missionary group. Her wash basin, full of dirty dishwater from the refreshments served, needed emptying. It was getting late, about 9:15 p.m., and so, to expedite the cleanup, she decided to use the sink in the basement men's washroom to empty the dirty water. When Mrs. McDonald entered the washroom, she came upon a sight almost too horrific to be imagined. On the floor lay a body, beaten bloody about the head, with clothing ripped and disheveled. Most disturbing of all, the body was that of a child. Calgary police were quick to identify the victim as 10-year-old Lynn Lefurgey, a student at the nearby Haltane School, who was reported missing earlier that day at 4:30 when she didn't come home from school. Witnesses report she had entered the school at the morning bell, but after the fracas of a lunchtime snowball fight off school grounds, none of her classmates noticed that she had not returned to the school for afternoon lessons. When police arrived at the scene, there were very few clues. Beside Lefurgey's body lay a glass soft drink bottle, and in the alleyway next to the church was a set of footprints in the newly fallen snow. The investigators worked through the night canvassing surrounding buildings and anyone who was a regular in the area, but few, if any, leads were generated. The following day, police still had little to go on. They had a vague description of a young man, about 20 years old, who had been seen loitering near the church the afternoon Lynn was murdered. But that's really all. Witnesses were few, and the only people in the church that morning were a construction crew working on an extension at the opposite end of the sanctuary. All were questioned, and none were suspects. As it was believed the murder might have had a very nefarious motive, the Albertan reported that police had rounded up all known sex deviants for questioning, but still weren't able to generate any useful information. Lynn's funeral on Monday, November 23rd, was attended by more than 350 mourners, including most of her classmates. She is buried at Union Cemetery in southeast Calgary. The night after her funeral, Calgary City Council unanimously voted to fund a reward of $5,000 for information leading to the arrest of the killer, adding to 3 funds of $1,000, $500, and $200 offered by anonymous Calgarians. The total is equivalent to about $67,000 in 2023. Until any new information was brought forth, police had only a vague description and a sketch with which to continue their search. Weeks went by and still no progress had been made finding the killer of the little girl who lived here on Park Road Southeast, where there is now a parking lot. Once sat a mother and her 3 remaining children, waiting for news that their loved one's murderer had been caught. And then finally, on Christmas Eve, 35 days after Lynn's brutal killing, police announced they had laid charges in the little girl's slaying. Ronald McCorquodale, 22, was already in custody for breaking and entering and contributing to juvenile delinquency when police charged him with Lynn's murder. He was sentenced on the delinquency charge on December 28th, which involved, interestingly, trying to lure 2 11-year-old girls into a bathroom at St. Mary's Cathedral just 2 days before Lynn was killed. On Wednesday, February 10th, McCorquodale appeared in police court in Calgary for a preliminary hearing. Newspapers reported that the gallery was full as throngs of people had come to hear the Crown present their evidence and have Magistrate R.V. Reid decide on whether it was enough to go to trial. Evidence presented included photos of the crime scene, witness testimony, and confirmation from medical experts that the soft drink bottle found beside Lynn's body was, in fact, the murder weapon. The most shocking detail was revealed by Sergeant of Detectives Gordon Gilks, who testified the body was found without clothing from the waist down. After 4 days of testimony, the magistrate ruled the accused would stand trial. When offered a chance to address the hearing, McCorquodale said only, "I got nothing to say." The trial began on May 24, 1960, and the testimony was almost as shocking as the murder itself. Cellmates of McCorquodale recounted how he bragged to them about his crime and how he was open about his nefarious intentions with the girl before he murdered her. One witness testified that McCorquodale had told him that Lynn Lefurgey fought him and screamed so much that he hit her with the bottle, and when the bottle broke, he was sure the struggle had been heard, and so he fled, leaving Lynn to die. The intent McCorquodale had when he began his attack on Lefurgey, the witness said, never came to fruition. The defense let most witnesses go unchallenged, and when the chance came to present their case, offered only 3 witnesses of their own. Dr. F.W. Hanley, a Calgary psychiatrist, testified McCorquodale suffered from schizophrenia, saying the accused hears voices and experiences hallucinations. Professor R. Schoenfield, psychologist at the University of Alberta, Calgary, and Edmonton psychiatrist Dr. R.K.C. Thompson both testified that McCorquodale was severely mentally ill. On May 27th, after just 3 days on trial, the jury of 6 men convicted McCorquodale and sentenced him to death. His execution was scheduled for August 24th. An appeal was filed in June and scheduled to be heard later that year. However, this is where McCorquodale's case and that of Robert Raymond Cook begin to converge. It was reported on August 19th that McCorquodale's death sentence had been commuted to life in prison through an action by the cabinet of Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, specifically his Minister of Justice, Davy Fulton. Calgarians were outraged, and newspaper editorials echoed their sentiment. A subsequent order from cabinet that McCorquodale never be paroled didn't do much to quell the city's furor. And so when Robert Raymond Cook's appeal was denied on September 15, 1960, his last recourse to save himself from execution was a communication from cabinet, the same kind of communication that spared Ronald McCorquodale's life just 1 month prior. But no such communication came, and Cook was hanged on November 15th, solidifying his legal legacy as the last Albertan ever led to the gallows. According to the Calgary Herald, in an editorial published the day Cook was executed, of 44 death sentences handed down since the Diefenbaker government's ascension to power in 1957, only 9 had been carried out and the rest were commuted by his cabinet. Might Cook have been spared had McCorquodale been allowed to be hanged, the editorial asked? It seemed, the editorial said, commutation of death sentences was more of a policy than an act of mercy. The next day, Prime Minister Diefenbaker strongly denied that Cook's hanging had anything to do with the outrage caused by his cabinet's commuting of McCorquodale's sentence. The Prime Minister told the Herald's Ottawa bureau, "Whoever made that suggestion couldn't have made a more sinister and unjustified suggestion. I can't imagine anything more subject to more direct condemnation than any such suggestion. I can't imagine anybody who would write such a thing." In the election of 1957 that made Diefenbaker Prime Minister, he won only 3 of Alberta's 17 seats and led a minority government that was defeated the following year. In the 1958 election, however, Diefenbaker's Progressive Conservatives won all 17 Alberta seats and a majority in Parliament. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that Diefenbaker, seeing the outrage at his ministers in Calgary and across Alberta, recognized that Alberta votes could be helpful in securing a victory in the next election. After all, in the election of 1962, 2 years after Cook's execution, Diefenbaker again led a minority government, this time with 15 Alberta seats, without which remaining Prime Minister would have been that much more difficult. And as an incredibly ironic footnote to this whole saga, Ronald McCorquodale hanged himself in his Prince Albert prison cell on January 25th, 1961. So were it not for a child-murdering psychopath named McCorquodale and a prime minister's cabinet mired in the politics of execution, Robert Raymond Cook might have been made infamous only for his terrible crimes and not as well for the sentence he was handed. Thank you for watching. Another one of my Alberta true crime videos is on screen now. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.